All right. So you know how we love to go deep on all sorts of wellness trends, right?
Yeah.
Well, this one's kind of a curveball. You sent us this research on the vagus nerve, and I have to admit, my first reaction was gargling. Come on, really?
Yeah, it sounds a little out there at first.
Right. But then I started digging into the source material you sent, and it's like, whoa, there might be something to this. So for all of us who are intrigued, but maybe a little skeptical, let's break it down. Could you give us the, like, vagus nerve 101? What exactly is this thing, and why should we care?
Okay, so think of the vagus nerve as this huge, like, information superhighway connecting your brain to pretty much all your major organs, your heart, your lungs, your gut, everything.
So it's kind of like the body's central command center.
In a way, yeah. But here's the key. It's not just one-way communication.
Yep.
Meaning it's not just your brain sending orders down the line. It's also all these organs sending messages back up to the brain. So like how well your digestion's working, how your heart's doing, all that feeds back into your mood, your stress levels, your overall health.
Yeah. Wow. So it's like this constant two-way conversation happening, influencing everything.
Exactly. And what's really cool is we can actually tap into this communication system and influence it ourselves, which brings us to the gargling thing.
Okay. So how on earth does gargling, something we do at the dentist or when we have a sore throat, how does that tie into this superhighway of the vagus nerve?
Well, the vagus nerve, it actually runs through the muscles at the back of your throat, right where you gargle. So
Mhm.
when you gargle, you're kind of like giving those muscles a gentle massage.
Interesting. So like stimulating it directly.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a direct line to this massive nerve network. And what your source material gets into, which is where it gets really fascinating, is that specific gargling techniques, like how you gargle and what you gargle with, they might actually be able to target different branches of the vagus nerve and influence different parts of your body.
Now that is intriguing. Targeted gargling. So we're not just talking about like salt water for a sore throat anymore.
Nope, we're going way beyond that. We're talking about different recipes and methods for different results.
Right. I'm hooked. Lay it on me. What kind of specifics are we talking about here?
Okay, so for example, one technique they talk about is using cold water and green tea, and this one's for neuroinflammation.
Neuroinflammation. So like inflammation in the brain.
Right, which is linked to all sorts of things, mood, cognitive function, even chronic diseases. And the idea here is that by gargling with this cold green tea, and this is where it gets even more interesting, you combine it with chanting OM.
Wait, chanting OM while gargling. What's the thinking behind that?
So apparently the sound vibrations, especially that OM sound, it can create this like resonance that further stimulates the vagus nerve.
Okay, now this is starting to sound a little woo-woo. I mean, I'm open to it, but how much evidence is there for this kind of thing?
Well, that's what we'll dig into more. It's a mix of traditional practices, anecdotal evidence, and some emerging science. And there are even more targeted techniques for things like heart health, digestion, even liver function. We'll unpack it all.
This is way more than I expected when we started.
Me too.
No.
This deep dive is definitely taking us down some unexpected paths, but it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. I'm already rethinking my whole gargling routine.
Yeah, and that's just the beginning. We'll get into even more of these specific techniques, and then we'll tie it all back to this bigger picture of epigenetics and how even simple actions like gargling can potentially influence how our genes express themselves.
Okay, now that's a whole other level. I can't wait to dive into that. I'm all ears.
Let's do it. So remember how we were talking about all those different gargling techniques for different health goals? Well, there's one that really stood out to me, and it's about using lukewarm water with either mint, ginger, or chamomile.
Yeah, that one caught my eye too. And it's specifically for, what was it, digestion?
Exactly, digestion. And you do it before meals.
Okay, so this is like prep work. Instead of like dealing with indigestion after you eat, it's more like setting the stage for good digestion from the get-go.
Right, exactly. And the source material talks about how this ties into the whole concept of vagal tone. Have you ever heard of that?
Vagal tone? Not really. Unless it's like a really bad karaoke singer.
Haha, no, not quite. Basically, vagal tone is like a measure of how active your vagus nerve is. And it turns out a higher vagal tone is a good thing.
Okay, so like a strong vagus nerve, good. A weak one, not so good.
Pretty much. And a higher vagal tone, it's linked to better regulation of all sorts of bodily functions, including digestion.
So the thinking is, by gargling this way, you're boosting your vagal tone, and that helps your digestion run more smoothly.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's like by stimulating the vagus nerve, you're strengthening the communication between your brain and your gut.
Fascinating. So it's not just about soothing the stomach after a big meal. It's about optimizing the whole process from the beginning. I mean, this is like way more sophisticated than I ever thought gargling could be.
Right. It's pretty cool. And it really shows how interconnected everything is, like how the nervous system and digestion, they're not separate things. They're all part of this big, complex web.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered targeted gargling, vagal tone, and I know we also wanted to talk about epigenetics, which honestly sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah, epigenetics can be a bit of a head scratcher at first, but it's a really important piece of the puzzle here.
So in the source material, they mentioned that these practices, combined with healthy lifestyle choices, can influence our genes. And I gotta say, that sounds pretty powerful and maybe a little bit like science fiction.
Well, it's definitely cutting edge science, but the basic idea is that epigenetics is the study of how our environment and our behaviors can actually change the way our genes work. And I'm not talking about changing the actual DNA sequence, but more like influencing which genes are turned on or off.
Okay, so I'm picturing like a giant library of genes, but the books that are open and being read, those can change depending on what we do and how we live.
That's a great analogy. And while the exact mechanisms they're still being researched, the evidence is showing that practices like gargling, along with things like diet, exercise, and stress management, they can all play a role in these epigenetic changes.
Wow. So we're talking about like potentially shaping the blueprint of our health. That's huge.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. And it just shows how powerful our choices can be.
This is blowing my mind.
Mine too, to be honest. Now, I do want to add a little caveat here. While the source material provides some really compelling ideas, and it's definitely sparking a lot of exciting research, we also need to acknowledge that this is still a pretty new area of study.
Right. So we're not saying this is a cure-all or anything.
Exactly. More research is definitely needed. But I think the takeaway here is that it's worth paying attention to these practices, even if they seem simple, because they might have a much bigger impact than we realize.
Agreed. It's all about being mindful of those everyday choices and how they might be influencing our health in ways we're just starting to understand.
And that's a really powerful message, don't you think? It puts us back in the driver's seat, gives us a sense of agency over our own well-being.
Absolutely.
Hmm?
This whole deep dive has been full of surprises.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say, after this deep dive, that gargling, well, it's not just for bad breath anymore.
Definitely not. I mean, who knew something so simple could have such potential, right?
It really makes you think twice about those everyday things we do, almost without thinking. Like, what else might we be overlooking?
Right. It's like this whole hidden world of possibilities.
I'm definitely looking at my daily routine a little differently now. Might even try out a few of these gargling techniques myself, see if I notice a difference.
I think that's the best way to approach it. See what resonates with you, what works for your body.
Yeah, exactly. It's all with that personal exploration. I gotta say, I started this deep dive feeling a little skeptical, but now I'm kind of excited by all this.
I get that. It's empowering, right, to think we might have more control over our health than we realize.
Exactly. And it's not just about gargling, is it? It's about this whole interconnectedness of our bodies and minds.
Yeah, it's like this deep dive has really highlighted that, the mind-body connection, how everything influences everything else. And that's really at the core of this whole discussion, isn't it?
It is. And it makes you wonder what other simple things are out there? What other everyday activities have this kind of untapped potential?
That's the beauty of it. There's always more to discover, always more to learn about ourselves and how we work.
Well, to our listener, thank you so much for sending in this fascinating topic. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep exploring, keep researching, keep asking questions.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and those bodies well. See you on the next deep dive.